Again with another episode of the Fuck Calories podcast. How are you doing, Dr. Soleil?
Hey, I'm great. How are you?
I'm great. So again, this is Dr. Soleil and Dr. Sarah. I'm a board certified OBGYN, complex family planning specialist, and obesity medicine. And you are?
I'm board certified in family medicine and integrative medicine, and also certified in what else do I do? Functional medicine and that kind of stuff.
Awesome. So we're just going to talk a little bit about our backgrounds today. So you and I met, we alluded to this in the last episode, but you and I met in medical school a long time ago. We were in Texas of all places, even though now we live in vastly different parts of the country by choice.
Right.
But we started out as really good friends back then, and in our friendship of knowing each other both before and after, we have been through a variety of different sizes and shapes. And I'll just kind of back up even further. My journey with weight began as a young child. I can actually remember my parents being told by a pediatrician that I needed to go on a diet when I was very young. I'm talking 3 or 4 years old. And I don't remember this, obviously, but I actually my parents have told me that my cholesterol was high as an infant, even though I was an exclusively breastfed baby, and yet I had like these like weight issues and stuff even from very young. And I struggled with weight my whole life. Went on my first really serious like self-inflicted diet, not like one that my parents put me on, but one that I wanted to do in high school. And I developed with that quite a bit of disordered eating. It was the first time I had lost a substantial amount of weight. I lost about 80 pounds in high school for my senior prom through some very significant disordered eating. And maybe we should put a trigger warning for this, because we are going to be talking about some disordered eating. And then I continued as I went into my adult years to yo-yo diet, and I have lost, if you include that 80 pound, I have lost over 100 pounds 3 times now, which should tell you that really I have gained back over 100 pounds 4 times. And so then most recently, in this new era of GLP-1 medications, I have now successfully lost weight again, and it has been going better. I, however, started at a higher weight, so I still don't have a normal BMI, but I feel much more capable and stronger than I have in many years of my adult life. And so one of the things that we're going to kind of talk about, we have an upcoming episode, we'll do a Science Minute episode where we kind of talk about the science of things and why we have this name, Fuck Calories Podcast. And that's because there's something that happens when you yo-yo diet, is that when you go through these large swings of caloric intake and then changing your body set point, calories, we kind of think of the calories as this like unit of measurement that is, like if you have like a cup of sugar or something, like a cup of sugar is always a cup of sugar is always a cup of sugar. But a calorie actually is a unit of measurement that is based on a bell curve of how 20-year-old men use and utilize energy. And so it's really not this like black and white standard that we think that it is. And one of the things that often happens, and our audience will know this if they've ever gone through big weight swings, is that when you yo-yo diet, when you gain the weight back, your body tries to get back to that previous set point, and your utilization of energy and your utilization of calories after that is different. And you actually can excrete or sequester more energy from the same amount of food. And so what ends up happening is people who have never struggled with this don't understand this phenomenon. And it was something that science previously didn't know existed. And so society has like gaslit all of us when we say, look, I have lost this weight before, but then I gained it back. Now I'm trying to lose it again. And it's different. It's harder. Society gaslights us and tells us, well, you must be lying on your, on your food diary, or you're not burning as many calories as you think you are, or you're eating more than you think you are, or, all these things that they tell us that it's your fault. You're not doing this well enough. And when reality, anyone who's been through this knows, like, I'm doing the same things, and you may even like internalize this guilt and this attacking yourself. You're like, well, I'm older now. Like, something isn't
Mm-hmm.
working like it used to. And in reality, we have science now that explains, and we're going to talk about this in our Science Minute podcast coming up, what happens with that. And so, unfortunately, that has been my background, that I have yo-yo dieted. Um, and I think that changes your brain chemistry and changes the way you process food and the way you think about food. And we know from Minnesota starvation experiments that it changes your brain's drive to seek um, calorically dense foods. And I'm really excited. We're going to talk about all of those things. But those are some of the ways that my background has shaped who I am today and why I'm so passionate about this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also really wonderful because now we do have these GLP-1 medications, and many of them, we don't 100% understand how they affect the brain, but we know that many of them seem to, anecdotally in our patients' experience and my own lived experience, they somehow affect those brain areas
Mm-hmm.
that lead to these set points in people's chemistry. And so a lot of that history is going to play into where we are today. What in your background brings you to this, and what makes you interested in this topic?
Yeah, so similar to you in that this I've been living, I think, with yo-yo dieting for my entire life. Unfortunately, I can remember back when I was 7, family members discussing my weight openly, and I look back at pictures when I was 7, and I was like, "Listen, I was fine." Which was unfortunate that it is stuck with me, and that was such a pivotal moment in my brain, if you will, at that time, and that has really never left, which is, as we will discuss right at other times, how formative that begins to be in your brain and the way we talk to ourselves and the way we present ourselves and the way we self-hate and the way we try to maybe restrict calories and eat less and, like, you know what I mean, do all these other types of diets. But I have been on all of the diets, and I have been successful at them and then not successful. So some of them worked a little bit better. I remember, again, kind of like high school, middle school, high school, kind of doing odd dieting. I did Weight Watchers right before prom, right? And so we're all like, oh my gosh, we have to look amazing in this dress. And that becomes a huge pivotal moment, I think, in a lot of people's high school memories. And so we make it this huge thing, and that we start talking about years before it even happens. And so that becomes larger and larger just because of the legend of the prom, and like, what is everyone going to wear, and like, who are you going to go with, and are you going to be the image that you've always imagined, right? Which, when I was growing up, was, oh my God, I want to be a tall, thin, blonde woman. I'm not tall, nor am I blonde, just FYI. And I've never been mistaken for thin. So it was really hard to try and fit myself right into these parameters that I had in my head at the time. And so I think, kind of coming to the age of where I'm at and knowing, looking back, how damaging that has been on the psyche and my mental health and my physical health, right? As we will also discuss, kind of changing our metabolism set points, changing everything, right? It causes a lot of stress, and then my adrenal dysfunction with the cortisol surges are throwing off my sleep. It's also making me, hold a lot of fat, and then you get diagnosed with PCOS, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, my hormones really are messing with me, and so it's really hard with everything kind of coming at you. And then from society standpoints, I also feel like, being physicians, we have also another external set point almost set for us, that, like, because you are a physician, you should also look a certain way. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, which is hard, right? Because when I come in and I maybe don't meet the standards, sorry, y'all, Taz is going crazy. Hey, you want to say hi to everyone? Yeah.
Hi.
Okay, you're
He's
gonna
like,
sit
where's
down and
that?
be quiet. Yeah. So it's also gets in the back of my brain that like, hey, I'm showing up as a physician, and it's really hard, I think, as women, because we're often mistaken for somebody else, right?
Yeah.
Whether that's other staff member, ancillary providers, nursing staff. Even though I walk in with my long white coat and it says thing, and I introduce myself, hey, I'm Dr. Soleil, and they're like, yeah, that's great. When's the doctor coming in? And I'm like, should I re-enter the room? Should we do this whole thing again?
Yeah.
And then in the back of my head, it's like, oh, is it because I don't look like a doctor, right? And what does that look like? And is it, then I go back to, oh, I should be tall, thin, and blonde. And I'm like, okay, well, I now to the point, right, in my 30s, yes.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I can let some of those go, but especially in my field of practice where I discuss a lot of right nutrition and hormone balancing and self-care and all of these aspects that are very important to my health. It's hard to then think about how others perceive you when you do not look a certain way, right?
Yeah.
So luckily,
well, and like how important are all these lifestyle factors for metabolic health? And then what is like the first thing we do as physicians? We sleep deprive ourselves.
yes,
We don't take care of ourselves. We don't have time to go to the gym. Like we are like the worst patients.
absolutely.
We're worse at following our own advice. And then we have this expectation that we should look a certain way, and it just makes it even. Anyway, I didn't mean to cut you off there and interrupt.
No, but 100%. We are. I think that's the worst. Is we create this really harmful environment for us to live in and to train in, and then we continue perpetuating it, right? Like, well, I had to work 100 hours a week, so now you do. And I'm like, first of all, none of this is healthy. Like, this is all awful. The fact that I have to be up for a certain amount of time taking care of patients in their lives is mind-boggling, especially now that I'm on the other side of it, right? I'm like, how does that still happen? But it also took me years to repair after it. I mean, I continued doing emergency medicine for a couple of years after I graduated residency, and that did a number, right? And it continued to affect my health. And so it really was recently when I could, years after, right, get all that stuff down, and I could introduce myself to a lower stress point, right? And I really took this work-life balance, whatever they always talked about in residency, and I never knew what it was until recently. And it's because I've had to say no to a lot of things, right? Like, no, I don't want to work that many hours, and no, I'll see less patients, and no, I'm not going to do that. And I think I get a lot of interesting looks when I talk to other physicians about how I've set up my practice and how I set up my clinic, and theory set up my boundaries, right, for my life, and like really setting hard stopping points of like, no, I'm no longer doing that to myself, has really been, I think, the catalyst for my most recent change, right? And so I think, 9 months ago, I was significantly more unhealthy, more overweight, hormones were crazy, sleeping was crazy, you know what I mean? And so it's really been with, I think, the new advancements in medicine and what we have available for patients out there that have tried everything and done everything and it still doesn't work, is now being available, right? And so now that new medications for my PCOS and my metabolic syndrome and my familial hypertriglyceridemia, right, whatever it is, we now have answers, whereas before we could literally just talk to you and say, right, you should stop eating that way and you should start walking more. And I'm like, I do. We're walkers and we're runners and we're hikers and we're, we did Kilimanjaro and I was we're obese, like hiking Kilimanjaro, right? But apparently, I mean, that gets me into the whole BMI thing, which don't get me started, right? Because I'm so upset that that's still a thing.
Well, and like the crazy thing is that you and I are in this kind of privileged space where we have been able to create boundaries for our lives. Like as in my primary specialty was OBGYN, delivering babies. And as anyone who's ever had a child knows, most babies are delivered in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
So what that means, if you're a physician that specializes in that, is that you are up in the middle of the night all the time. And, most OBGYNs do not sleep at night.
Right.
And we have crazy, insane schedules. And, I have kind of arrived, meaning that I've been able to kind of step back and carve out certain aspects of my job that I enjoyed and that I would be willing to compromise and keep, and then let other parts of it go. And that is a really privileged place to be in. And for our audience, not all of them may have the opportunities to do that, and they may still have jobs where they are working 2 or 3 different jobs. They have children that are in, all these different activities, or they have this going on and that going on. And, they may not be able to make some of the lifestyle boundaries that you and I have been able to do. And so
Right.
we get it. And so that's one of the really amazing, wonderful things about these meds, is that they are not taking the place of all of these lifestyle things that we want to focus on, but they are providing a small shortcut that you can then enable all the other lifestyle activities to not feel like such a huge inertia, starting energy. I can't remember the word I'm thinking of, but the try to get over that initial hump of trying to live a more intuitive lifestyle, and taking care of yourself and setting boundaries and self-care.
Right. Absolutely. Because I think you bring up a really good point. It's not one for the other. It's an added tool that we have. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, let's start talking. I guess let's jump into that. What is, I guess, should we even start with that? What is, GLP-1 medications? Because I feel like that's the majority of the medications when I'm approached by my patients and they're asking questions about it, it's always those. And I think it's because what started out as Ozempic being the brand name, right? Semaglutide being being the generic, and then Wegovy was FDA approved, right, for weight loss. And now we have Mounjaro or tirzepatide. And we actually have a triple peptide coming down the pike and hoping less than 2 years. I don't know.
Maybe. We'll see.
Yeah, exactly. We'll see how that goes. But this family of medicine and the family of peptides, I think, have been really interesting in the field of medicine, and especially obesity medicine, because there hasn't been really anything else. So let's dive into maybe what we've used in the past and what we're using now, and maybe a combination of both of them, if you want.
Yeah, totally. So GLP-1s, they're a hormone that we naturally have in our body that tells us that we are full. So it's a hormone that's naturally secreted when you have had a meal, that tells your body, I am satisfied, I am satiated. And so what we do when we have these medications, so as you mentioned, semaglutide is the generic name for the first medicine, well, not the first medicine, but the first one that we have been using in this space for weight loss. The GLP-1 family has been used for almost 20 years for diabetics, but specifically Ozempic came out and it had this really fantastic weight loss side effect profile. And so then it was rebranded as Wegovy for weight loss. And then a second peptide came out that has a dual agonist or dual action that is a similar class, but actually hits 2 different hormones that do basically the same thing. It makes you feel full and gives you that satiety feeling. And so it kind of turns off some of the brain chatter that you have when you are seeking food. And so the original brand name for this medication that was used in diabetics is Mounjaro. And then now it has just been FDA approved for Zepbound, which is the same medication, but specifically labeled for weight loss. And so we are in a really fortunate position where we now have these really fantastic meds that have just blown the previous meds out of the water. That's not to say that the other meds that existed in the space were bad. They just were not as successful. Phentermine is a medicine that is used often, but it has a kind of a really unfortunate reputation because back some decades ago, it was combined with another medication, and so that medicine was nicknamed fen-phen. And it was two meds together, and the non-phentermine medication caused some significant heart problems. Some people were dropping dead and things like that. And so people got really scared of phentermine. And so a lot of people were afraid of it and don't want to use it, but it's actually a really fantastic drug that you can use in patients that if they don't have access to the GLP-1s, it helps to do some of the same satiating things. It doesn't hit the same hormones, but it does kind of quiet some of that food noise. And so that is something that is now used if you can't get a hold of GLP-1s, or sometimes it's used as an adjuvant. And we can kind of talk about tachyphylaxis and step therapy, things like that later on. And it can also be combined with another medicine. Anyway, and so we have a number of meds in our arsenal, but none have been the stars that the GLP-1s families have been. And as you mentioned, there is another one coming down the pipeline that will actually hit 3 different hormones. The generic name is retatrutide. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. I haven't actually heard anyone talk about it, so I've only read it.
Yeah.
So anyway, hopefully that's pronounced correctly. But it's only in phase 2 trials right now. It's got some time before it will be on the market. But it looks really, really promising.
Yeah, that's exciting. So the medication I've been on, I think longest, especially, I guess, okay, so with my history of PCOS, right, I that comes with insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome and hormone irregularity and a lot of...
We're going to do a deep dive, just for our audience, we're going to do a deep dive on PCOS in the future, coming at this hormone perspective from you, from me, from being OBGYN, etc. And we're really excited to get into that. But anyway.
But before the GLP-1s, I think, were available to me, I basically was told to start on metformin, right? And birth control pills and... because of my history of nutraceuticals and supplements, I knew, these other things can also help me with the PCOS. So I was doing all of the things, but it wasn't until recently, right, with the introduction of the GLP-1s, that really I started to see the most difference. So metformin, I think, is one of those that often sometimes gets forgotten about because it's kind of one of those things that most people start at the beginning, but it's not maybe giving them the end results that they were wanting, right? Because in metformin, you're not necessarily seeing this massive weight loss, but it is helping with the insulin and the blood sugars and the other aspects of it. And it has really great studies behind it with longevity and people and their diseases and prediabetes and insulin resistance, et cetera, et cetera. So I still like that medicine to begin with before we even, add further ones on. But now I'm on both, right? The metformin and the GLP-1s, and that's working really well for me. Have you seen that as well in your patients or?
Totally.
Yeah.
And I was actually going to ask you while we're on this topic, yes, this is a leading question, but since you brought up supplements, say if we have someone in our audience who is interested in pursuing this, what is, obviously in order to get metformin, you have to have a prescription. There are some... So one thing that is kind of cool is that a lot of our pharmaceutical drugs are actually based originally on plants. And that's kind of how we learn about them, is often from some of these ancient compounds that are naturally produced in plants. So I was going to ask you, if we were to have someone in the audience that is interested in metformin's effects on longevity, on insulin resistance, etc., what is something that they could walk down their, supplement aisle and pick up that can help with that, or that can help?
Yeah, so something that I've tried and have some of my patients on, especially if I'm thinking more about the use of supplements for insulin resistance, right? And so trying to bring down that blood sugar and trying to sensitize yourself to insulin, because if insulin is so high all of the time, our body is constantly being told to make more adipose tissue, right? Basically make more fat cells, stuff all this blood sugar into the fat, and it just leads us to fat gain, right, throughout the time. And so we really want to bring those levels down so your body stops maybe hoarding or making more fat and starts using and utilizing the fat as energy, because we're like, listen, I have excess, I have carrying around all of this energy, you just have to utilize it, but your body can't, and it can't tap into it unless we bring those insulin levels down. So I use a lot of things like berberine, chromium, cinnamon. I'm making sure that vitamin D and magnesium levels are optimized because those are huge. If we have more of the sugar cravings, I've had a lot of success with like gymnemna, which is an interesting, and I don't even know if I'm saying that one correctly, but there's definitely a lot of different supplements on the market that have been shown to be beneficial.
Yeah. And that's
And
exactly
nice to
what I was getting
adjunct.
at. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I was getting at. Was berberine is actually from the same plant that we discovered metformin from, and so if you didn't have a way to get a hold, if you wanted to be on a metformin like compound, berberine is it, and you don't need a prescription for berberine. You can take it in a low dose supplement over the counter, and before I had access to metformin, before I had access to GLP-1s, I was taking berberine. And so I think that it's a really, really wonderful, and that the whole thing that you were talking about, and we'll talk about this in one of our future podcasts, but when your body is making the decision about to utilize the fat stores on your body for energy versus not, we call that fuel partitioning. And so talking about like what your body is utilizing, and if you eat a food and then your body stores that, and then later on when you need more calories, instead of your body utilizing that storage, the body can tell you, oh, I'm starving, I don't have access to those stored calories, and instead make you hungry, make you want to go eat. And so we call that fuel partitioning. And when you have lived with obesity and or you have done this yo-yo dieting like we were talking about earlier, that's one of the things that we will talk about in our Future Science podcast, is that your body doesn't utilize the calories that you have, and it actually sequesters them and shuts them off, and so you don't have access to that previously stored energy, and you actually feel like you're starving, and your brain tells you that you're starving, and you have this like food drive that you need to eat. And people who have never been through that don't understand that, because they have healthy fuel partitioning and their body utilizes the fat that they have.
Right.
And so that's something that you and I have experienced and lived through. And before the science kind of explained what was going on, we as society just like blamed the person with obesity, that they just didn't have enough self-control to like not keep eating.
Right.
when in actuality, your like cells are starving, your brain is like preventing your body from utilizing the fat stores, and you are actually hungry and
Right.
you're actually starving. So I think that the fuel partitioning is so important, and metformin helps with that, and berberine does as well if you don't have access to metformin.
Yeah. Make sure it's a good quality.
Totally.
Yeah, all that good stuff. But we can get into the nitty gritty of supplements. But yeah, I love talking about them, and because you're absolutely right. I think a lot of people have more access to them, and then maybe seeing your doctor or trying some pharmaceuticals, because I have some sensitive patients that just don't do well with pharmaceuticals at all, right? And so they try and go more supplement based or natural or nutrition or whatever. But yeah, that is interesting, especially when you mentioned how people and fuel partition, and people are hungry with having extra fuel right on their body, and so you are in a larger body but are hungry all the time, and it then becomes almost like a moral judgment from society, because they feel like, why are you eating? Right? Yeah. Like, why? Somehow I don't deserve to eat when I'm hungry because I'm in a larger body, right? Which it just doesn't make sense. But it perpetuates this stigma of people in larger bodies being lazy, or not being not taking themselves seriously, or not taking care of themselves, and etc. Now that could absolutely be true for some people that are like, listen, I want to eat 6 pepperoni pizzas tonight and do nothing. But the majority of people are not doing that, and they have tried, and it becomes very frustrating then when you get judged on top of that.
Totally. And you
you
were
know.
talking about like your family talking about your weight when you were 7 years old. I mean, I think that you and I have talked about this like every single time I had like every single time there was holidays with the family. And most, not all, but a lot, there are a number of people in my family that are very obese. And there would always be conversations that I would hear my relatives talk about, like, oh, so and so ate this and didn't eat this. And, and it becomes this like, if you are a certain body type, you are only allowed to eat salad. And like,
Right.
is if you go out to eat with people, are they noticing what you eat? Are you allowed to allowed to
Right.
have something? And like, I mean, just the crazy amount of judgment and stigma and shame that we put on each other
Mm-hmm.
is just totally unfounded and not okay. And those are some of the things that you and I are gonna break through in this podcast and talk about, and hopefully do some myth busting and create a more world that's more accepting of different body types and body positivity, but not toxic positivity.
Yes,
So
yes, absolutely. Okay. But I think that is, you hit the nail on the head, and there's a perfect summary of what we're intending to do with this podcast and where we're coming from. So I feel like we could even wrap it up there, and then we'll
yeah,
start making some ideas of future podcasts and episodes. So if you guys want to leave comments and questions, or find us on Facebook, we are Fuck Calories Podcast anywhere on all of the social medias. There's a high likelihood that the C is or the U is an asterisk, so just be aware of that. Because while we can say it, they don't usually like to see it typed out.
yeah.
But yeah.
And then just in closing, although Dr. Soleil and myself are both physicians, we are not your personal physician. No patient relationship was formed by listening to this. This is for your entertainment and self-realization and self-actualization only. This does not constitute medical advice.
Yes, education purposes only. Yes, good thinking, Dr. Sarah.
All right. All right, my friend. We'll see you next time. It's been great chatting with you.
So, bye, y'all.